Here's what translation management systems don't want you to know about integrations. First thing is that most integrations don't work nearly as well as expected. So when you get two different systems to communicate with one another, it's rarely as simple as it may seem. You have all kinds of different things that can happen with how that data is presented, how is it stored, how it's transmitted, how it's received. You have to look into security aspects as well. So when you talk about an integration, it's very simple to say, well, do you have an integration, for instance, into this system or that system? That doesn't mean that the integration is actually going to do what you want it to do. So for instance, just as an example, maybe I use a CRM and someone asks me, does your translation management system integrate into the CRM? Yes, it does. It integrates that. Now, if you open the hood and you take a look at what that integration means, maybe it just means that whenever you create a new contact in the CRM and you mark the deal as closed, it'll create a contact in the translation management system. So think about it. Now you have an integration that all it does is it takes the data of a new contact and creates that data in the translation management system. That's not much, right? Think about the manual effort that it would take to just create a single contact from one platform to another. Not much. Now, when you look at that integration, first, it allows the translation management system to say, yes, we do have that integration. B, allows the user or the prospective user to be at peace and at ease with the fact that the integration exists. But it's a very simple integration. It's not going to really solve the problem that the CRM and the TMS are separate systems that really don't speak to each other, right? So a lot of people misunderstand the idea of an integration as if two systems speak with one another. Very rarely do integrations truly work like this in a bidirectional and more comprehensive way. So the first thing you have to take a look at is what is the scope of the integration that is being talked about. The second thing is the effectiveness of the integration. So again, here's another example. Let's say you have a content management system. Does it integrate with your TMS? Maybe the answer is yes. Now you start taking a look at how the integration works, and it's plugin based, for instance, and it's plugin based, and you have to go into that CMS and install an app, and maybe you have to select manually each of the assets, and maybe you have to press a bunch of buttons to get those assets to be pushed into the TMS, and maybe you're going to have assets that look terrible in the TMS because the tagging structure doesn't look really good in the CMS to begin with, and now the translation process is quite honestly going to be sucky at best. And that's another thing, right? The TMS can say, yes, do we integrate? Yes, we integrate. Now, how is the integration going to impact the translation experience, the deliverability of that content? That's a much deeper question, and I don't see that many users going into that. So typically, the mindset with an integration is more of a check the box kind of thing. Can we check the box that there is an integration in place? Few users take the step of actually running simulations, understanding what are the upsides and downsides of that particular kind of integration, what are the opportunities, are there workarounds, etc. So we talked about scope first, then we talked about the effectiveness of that integration. The other thing that we need to keep in mind about an integration is, does the integration happen seamlessly or does it require manual triggering? That's very different, right? Whenever you have two systems that are talking seamlessly, let's say using webhooks and bidirectional integrations, that feels a lot more like a conversation. It feels, from a user perspective, very seamless. Let's say, for instance, the integration is I create an invoice in my TMS that syncs the invoice creation in a accounting software. That accounting software gets the invoice marked as paid. That marks the invoice as paid, for instance, in the TMS. That's a very seamless kind of integration. Now, if you have integrations that require, for instance, pushing some kind of button to download some kind of log file, to upload it somewhere else, or something that is unreliable, that kind of integration, it's not going to be seamless. It's not going to be, in the end, ultimately super effective. And then I would say, finally, when you think about integrations, it's really important to see exactly what kind of integrations are needed and aren't needed. And I think there's an over expectation as to what integrations are going to be able to solve. Integrations are particularly necessary in large scale use cases. They're very important. So let's say if you have a large CMS with a lot of content that gets exported on a daily or weekly basis into a ton of languages, you definitely need an integration. And you don't just need any simple integration. You need a very customized, robust integration that ensures that that particular use case is going to work seamlessly. Because at scale, you feel any little inefficiencies, you're going to feel them incredibly, right? That's the nature of scale. It magnifies all of the problems of any particular process. Now, if you're talking about, for instance, a content management system that you're running and maybe you're processing a project a month, updating occasionally a given website, even though the idea of an integration may sound very appealing, the process may actually work better without any kind of integration because you have a lot more control over the process. Maybe you can download the files. Maybe you can run some kind of filter on the files after you download them, or pre-process the files prior to translation. Maybe you can then translate them and then post-process them later too. You have a lot more kinds of granularities of control in workflow and in processes when you're not running with integration. So the way I see it, integration is typically an evolution of a process that's already in place and working well. Once you have that process that's in place, working well, ready to scale, then you're ready to integrate. And I would say as a last thought around integration is this idea that it's not just because there is the promise of integration is I don't have to work and I don't have to worry about something. And it's typically quite different. You're changing the nature of the problem sets when you're working with deep integrations. And when you look at the fact that every CMS, every software is built completely differently and is used completely differently, and so many of these softwares are so sprawling and big. If you take a look at some of these larger CRMs, they'll have endless APIs. So it's very important to understand that integrations aren't like comparing apples to apples. You're typically comparing apples to oranges, to pineapples, to other kinds of food out there. So the word integration is a very misleading word because it tends to relay this idea of similarity between them. And there is very little similarity. Even within the same software can be used in so many different ways that it no longer even feels or resembles that same software. So that's what I had to say today about integrations, but would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for listening, and leave your comments and subscribe below if you'd like this video.